Oh, you muted me. I didn't know you did that, babe. Hey, everybody. Super pumped, like I said in the chat room, super pumped to have this conversation tonight. I know that given the zeitgeist, right, the time, it's almost as if our students are, kind of screaming at us to help them. And I'm hoping that tonight can kind of build a dialogue and discourse in answering the students who are asking, what is it about me that you can't teach? I'm here for this webinar because the genesis of my interest in equity and trying to pave a pathway of opportunity for the voiceless and marginalized began very early. When I was 4 years old, my father's PhDs in theology and ethics. And so I grew up not only with sort of the gospel and the true word, but also experiencing his March on Selma and experiencing us harboring fugitives in the House because we were registering people to vote. And he was asked to integrate Carroll County. We know that southern states were loath in the mid-60s to obey federal law. And so I saw my mother kind of field threatening phone calls and hate mail. I witnessed FBI informers taking photos of my father and the family on campus. And I remember a neighbor 3 doors down. I was 4, my brother was 5. And as we were walking home, she was sweeping her porch and she yelled at the top of her lungs a epithet that is sort of a label that children of color at 4 years old often hear, except I'm white. And so the word lover was added to that. And the impact of that, because of course I had no idea what it meant, but it sounded horrific, has never left me. And so in my seeking and finding a way to serve social justice and equity, I have only taught in minority majority schools. The one I am now is in Long Reach High School in Howard County, Maryland. And I'm the instructional team leader for social studies. And it is a school that has between 35 and 40% farms and over 60 languages. And I presently teach ELL government and AP government and AP psychology. Thrilled that my Maryland representing in the House, Josh Parker, is with me tonight. Josh.
I always love listening to your story, Jody. It's powerful and it's real. So I just want to say hello. I don't want to talk for such a long time because I really want to get to the discussion and I want to hear what you all have to say. So glad so many people are on this call. So many friendly faces from Mount Holyoke and Instoy and all over. So just hello and welcome. So my story in kind of equity and my whole idea get into school was I first wanted to be what everybody who was black and young at the time that I knew and was a male wanted to be, which was a professional basketball player. So the problem with that was that I had to be good and I wasn't. So I had to try to find something else to do. And in the process, I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. And so I went to school for that. And as I went to school and became a member of the Black Student Union at Towson University and eventually the president of that organization, I began to understand another narrative that was happening with my people, which is to say, I had knew nothing about inner city schools because I didn't go to an inner city school. Then I started hearing about the achievement gap for the first time. And I was like, what is that? And so as a leader of that group on campus, I had to start to understand in a more real way the struggle that many of our people were going through. And I said, I'm going to have to address this, but I don't know how I'm going to address this by being a sports broadcaster. So I put that on the side, but that was still my burning bush moment. So I went on and I started out as a sports producer in Maryland at Fox 45 of Baltimore. And I said, all right, this is it. But it just left me unfulfilled. And so I said, what I'm going to do is I need to figure out how I'm going to address this question that has been plaguing me, how I'm going to help my people, whether it be black and brown kids, males, things like that. How am I going to help them? Let me just pause on that. And while I pause on that, let me go and substitute teach to make ends meet. And so when I started substitute teaching, I said, this is how I solve the problem. I need to teach. And so I've been a teacher ever since then. And now I'm an instructional coach in Paul Laurence Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C., where I am really working for equity by professionalizing the teaching practice. I think if we make better teachers, we will be able to solve the equity issue. I think a lot of times we need not an either or approach, but a both and approach. We need great pedagogy and content knowledge on the one side, but we need to have conversations like we're having right now so that you understand what the dynamic and dialectic is between underserved, traditionally children in our schools. So that's kind of my commitment to excellence and also to equity. And I'm so glad that you all are here. If you can, please just put your name, what you teach, and where you're from in the chat box so that everybody can know what regions we're in. I see some from Maine, from all over. So if you can put yourself in the chat box, and we're going to go into our terms right now, our terms for this conversation. So our terms for engagement, I'm going to open this up a little bit. And I'm going to give you all time to respond because I just asked you to put your names in the chat box. And now I'm asking you to respond to a couple of questions. Pick any one of these three questions that speaks to you. You just read the questions on there. I'll read just one that speaks to me. But any one of those three questions, if you can respond in the chat box, and then we'll come back on and really talk about what we mean by power and privilege. The one that speaks to me, and maybe Jody, you can step on and talk about one that speaks to you, is how do we play a role in the power dynamics in a classroom? So if that speaks to you, go ahead and put that in the chat box. You can also raise your hand if you want to be heard, and we'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. So pick any one of those three questions, and then we'll begin. That's powerful. From Karen McDonald, that talks about privilege allowing some families to access opportunities that others may not be able to access or may not even know that they can access.
And Eleanor, I like your comment about suspension. And I would like to, maybe extend that a little bit more about what we see in terms of disproportionate discipline. So I want to hold on to that thought.
Andrea, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Andrea really brings up a good point. Students of privilege have an expectation they will be successful. It's a given from them. So the expectation when they come in, well, they can handle this, and that's where they rise to. Some that aren't in that expectation don't rise to that because no one's ever expecting them to do that difficult work.
And Marge, I really do like that. And I think that I'd like to, sort of unpack that a little bit more with regard to how educators actually even recognize and acknowledge their privilege and its impact. And, maybe we can help other educators recognize that in themselves and the impact that it actually may play in instruction and learning.
So Eleanor, can you you can open up either on your mic or in the chat room. Can you talk a little bit about your differences in grading standards? What do you mean by that? I'd love to know a little bit more about it.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you perfect.
Okay. Despite all of the talk about rubrics, I have noticed that students of color are sometimes graded more leniently than other students for the same level of work, and in other cases, they are judged more harshly. And so you never quite know where the student is, what the level of learning and performance actually is, and how much of it is prejudice.
That's right.
I often wonder, in fact, to give you an example, for my grandson, I once had a teacher in his school to evaluate an assignment to see whether or not it would meet expectations. And she thought it was wonderful. And his classroom teacher downgraded it without being able to explain how it could be improved. I looked at that teacher differently for the rest of the year.
Wow.
You know, Kathy, I'd love for you to come in because I see that you're talking about privilege and that it dictates expectations. Can you speak to that in tandem with what Eleanor is speaking about? Kathy, can you unmute?
So often when I believe that instruction and expectations are determined by color or by free and reduced lunch or by special ed, that we don't we don't hold that high expectation mindset for our students all the time. And we need to work much harder at doing that.
So Kathy, tell me where is that learned? How do educators learn that? Where is that coming from?
Society in general, just what they grew up with, what they know. I'm not sure how to dig deeper into that right at the moment.
I know I appreciate your honesty, and these are. So I wanted earlier to let everybody know that this is a safe, sacred space for us because a lot of us are really dealing with many dynamics in our departments and schools, and yet we know what is to be true with the experiences of our students and their needs and the impact that educators bring through the door jam with them. And I do think this is one of them. So in one of my challenges and in my current doctorate program in instruction and assessment, and I'm thinking about critical pedagogy and cultural competency. And I'm wondering, I mean, is there a need for new hiring practices? Or is that too much of a magic wand? Because we do know, Kathy, and all of you here tonight know that the teachers who have this privilege and power are clearly going to be disheartened in the classroom, which will be affecting the students, just like Kathy from with farms. If farms is a natural generator of prejudice, then my goodness, where are we, you know?
I think that's a really powerful point, Jody. And we're going to go right to the terms in terms of how we define them. Remember that this definition that we're going to put on the screen for power and privilege is something that is malleable. It's something that you can say, you know what, I'm going to take a piece of that. I agree with that. And we just kind of want to put it out there in terms of our understanding of power and privilege for the context of this conversation. I do want to piggyback onto what Jody said. I think hiring practices do need to be examined, certainly. And I also think what's interesting is that one of the things that privilege almost stultifies is your ability to empathize, right? I think that's the worst part of privilege, is that it's hard for you then to see like they can see. So power, I'm just going to read these real quick for those that are on the phone. For those that already can see it, I apologize. So power we define in the context of school is the ability of a person or group of people to withhold the access to advantageous resources or the opportunity to participate safely and without reasonable restraint into the everyday functions of a school. When I think about that definition, I think about my dinner table this evening. Before this webinar, I was talking to my son and my daughter, and typically it takes a while for my son to say anything about school. How was school? He says, fine. But when I asked him, how does your teacher use power in classroom? His hand shot right up. And so I think about this idea of what a teacher or even an administrator is able to do to restrict access for any number of students to safety, to curricular resources, to great grading, as Eleanor spoke of. That is power. And teachers have it inherently as members of that system, but how are we using it? Finally, privilege. Privilege is having the possession of a position or status that exclusively comes with access and opportunity to safety, promotion, and attention in the schoolhouse. This possession is exclusively given to people on the basis of some inherent or ascribed characteristic, color, personality trait, or socioeconomic achievement. So privilege then is something that I can have based on something that is ascribed to me or something that is inherent to me that you can't have. And the you that we're talking about are people that are traditionally underserved, like minority students. And even, I would even bridge that further, minority educators in some cases as well. So this is the context of power and privilege. And because we have a couple other questions we want to get to, I just kind of want to put that there. If you have any reaction to it, you can of course put that in the chat. And I'm going to go ahead and leave it to Jody for the next slide.
So yeah, I'm thinking about those definitions of power and privilege and know that they do not necessarily connotate color. What are some of your biggest challenges that you face with equity? And here I'm really asking for you to go deep and be as honest as you can, because it is this beginning tonight with this webinar that is going to be sort of this storybook that we continue of pedagogical practice and desire for equity and justice for students. So with your contributions and dialogue with these questions, and because I just saw that Kay McCann, forgive me, I see Kay McCann, you're talking about this reflective practice, see, and maybe the needs to videotape and have someone sort of be part of that process and conversation. Maybe that is a challenge that you're facing. What's not working for traditionally, underserved students? How does power and privilege play a part in your school, in your classroom? Are we recognizing in ourselves the power and privilege that we bring to it? Give you a couple of minutes, like before, just to sort of readily share out. Feel free, feel safe to really offer up some examples that are going to be helpful for all of us in extending the dialogue. Mm. So Kay Davis Caldwell, if you don't mind, can you feel safe enough to maybe extend your thought there that I think is going to be a great foundation from which to build this conversation?
Sure. Hey, Jody, it's Keisha.
Hey, babe.
I just spoke a little bit about even when you have a district that has practices in order to combat power and privilege, if people aren't in touch with their own general bias and how they operate under power and privilege, then those procedures aren't enforced. So case in point, I was a mathematics coach for a district at 4 different schools, 4 very different dynamics in terms of students and staff. And as a coach, one of my jobs was to oversee the placement process for students going into gifted and talented and AP classes. And so the district gives a test, but they understand that a test is not the only measure of excellence and readiness for higher level learning. So there's a placement process. Students miss every year by 3, 4, 5, 10 points. It can still be placed in. A parent just has to make a request for you to pull additional information, work samples, etc. And I would sit in meeting after meeting where administrators, teachers, even parents would look at a student of color, a student versus a student not of color or a student of privilege. They might have identical scores. A student of color might have better work samples. Their parents have also articulated, and over again, I would hear, well, I'm not so sure that she can do the work. I'm not so sure that he's capable or that he really fits in with those students. And it takes a lot of courage to combat your colleagues in the midst of that and really say, are we talking about academic excellence, possibilities, and expectations, or are we pigeonholing students based on personal bias? And I think that's part of what we have to do as colleagues is become familiar with our own biases and then get to a point where we're comfortable having the really hard conversations in a professional and caring way with our colleagues, and challenge others to call us. You know, if we are riding those lines of power and privilege.
Yeah, I really appreciate your honesty, and I appreciate that in that example. I think one of the best things that I learned from my father, and of course as a witness to his advocacy, was that to go to the mat on principle is a lonely mat, and yet you've got to stand on it for that which is just, no matter what. And for us, for me, you know, it's an academic and moral imperative, because what I'm hearing is almost like on the one side, yeah, we want to elevate our profession and we want to be proud of that which we do in behalf of our students. And then on the other hand, with what we sort of know is percolating, right, under the, you know, this current zeitgeist, is how is this acculturation going to be remedied? How is it that, yes, still in lounges and in classrooms, we see, but for a socioeconomic income, there's brilliance. But for, right, the color of one's skin, there's brilliance. But for the English language learner, there's brilliance. How are we going to begin to do that? Because we don't have time. We don't have time. What do we do?
And do it with care and love so as not to attack our colleagues, as many don't even know and don't even understand the privilege that they've benefited from. So part of it is the teaching and learning about oneself and alongside of your colleagues, and doing that in a way that is real and authentic, but takes the threatening part away so that no one feels attacked. And that's a hard balance. It's hard to do that.
I think that, hey Keisha, how are you? I think that's a really excellent point. And we're going to, in a couple seconds or a minute or so, get to the solution side of this. But that's a really interesting problem. And the problem really is, why is it that smart looks one way? Why is it that intelligence and the aspirations and the capacity looks one way, one color, or predominantly one color in most schools, or has a certain amount in the bank account? And so that's kind of an issue. And then Keisha, who really brings this out really well, how do you confront or have a conversation with a staff member about maybe bias that's not even coming out in a way that doesn't shut down further collaboration? I think that's a reality in a lot of schools, and a reality that I know that I've seen myself as well.
Well, and because we must keep it real in behalf of our students, many of us know that it's almost the white liberalism that makes a larger, more impactful hurt on the students. And I'd like us to recognize that within the dialogue as well. Because that is the case, right? Those are the ones who aren't really recognizing their own pedagogical practice, and the ones that are in the staff rooms, right, talking about students, mocking them. Really, this isn't just happening in schools that I've worked in, right? All of you are wonderful teachers all across the country. We see what is there. And that is what's truly frustrating to me, because hiding behind unions, I'm going to say it, right? Hiding behind being protected because of a personality by the administrator. And meanwhile, back in the classroom, how many generations of students does it take? Here in Maryland, because I have worked and have done a co-author of a Department of Justice report on women in criminal justice, there's 5 generations of women in the Maryland Correctional Institute for Justice. How many more does it take until we can really reach, right, the very goodness and humanity and brilliance that is there?
This is Laurie. I'd love to say something about what Josh said about why is it that smart looks one way. It comes from one socioeconomic status or one race or one part of town or one profession in the family or education. I think it's really important because a really important question, because there's just so much research that shows that when teachers perceive a kid as smart, they have higher expectations for her. They encourage her more, and they put up with less inadequate work. They don't let her get away with it, right? You're gifted. I expect better of you, right? And when teachers think a kid is not smart, then they accept less and they don't push them into honors classes or AP classes. And so, they've done studies where you take a teacher and you say, these 5 kids have been identified as gifted, and they weren't identified as gifted. And what happens at the end of the year is not only can they trace different behavior in the teacher, but actually those kids learn at a faster rate than anybody else. So it becomes sort of a self-fulfilling thing. So I think that's really an important point, Josh, and I want to thank you for raising it.
I appreciate that, Lori. And I think Major is ready to rock and roll. I'm listening to you.
Definitely. So I'm enjoying this conversation. I'm not an educator, but I guess my point of contention, if you will, is simply trying to understand what role the institution itself as the state, who is writing the curriculum and who's enforcing these types of standards on our teachers, which make it difficult to produce the results we're looking for as educators. But from the institutional standpoint, what role does that play? Because, the question came up, how do we kind of evaluate and kind of standardize what smart looks like or what intelligence looks like?
Right.
Well, the state kind of determines it and says, if you're not meeting these requirements, you're not performing well. And so therefore you start having these chronically failing schools and all these types of initiatives like we have in Georgia with the Opportunity School District, where government is essentially trying to come in and overtake what's going on in the classroom. So what kind of role does that play in the conversation?
I think it's a powerful point. And if I can kind of speak to Major and Georgia's in the house, so welcome, Georgia. We got a couple other Georgias on the call. So I think, and we'll get switch to solutions in 1 second, but I think handling institutional bias happens at awareness first, and then opportunity second, and then action third. And I think that we can get into kind of that 3-step process in a second. I do want to back up 1 second, and I want to illustrate one last problem. It's the path of least resistance problem. So I teach in inner city school in DC, 90% Title I high school. And what happens with my teachers, because I'm a coach and I'm the coach of all my English teachers, is they'll say, all right, when I ask them to read by themselves or to write by themselves, I get all this pushback. I don't want to keep fighting the fight every day. So it's an issue because the ones that are pushing back in my school all look like me and are 98% Black. And so the equity issue is, if the kids aren't spending independent time reading and writing, there is no way they're going to get better at reading and writing. And so that's kind of a major issue. And I wanted to bring it down to the classroom, as well as we talk about, of course, the institution as well. I really just want to talk about that. So we're already at our slide, and time is already racing, as I knew that it would with this conversation. Your contributions, everybody, are fantastic. So thank you. And if anybody wants to contribute on the solution side, I want to kick it off by saying what I just talked to Major about, which everybody I think heard, which is talking about awareness first. So think about an institutional problem, and I will answer my 3-part solution with a story. About a month ago, I went to a professional development in the English department of DC Public Schools. DC Public Schools, by the way, very progressive district. Love the district. They're doing a lot of great work, as is other counties, Baltimore County, other places in Maryland and DC. And so I went to this English professional development, and I noticed that most of the instructors in the central office, most of them looked a certain way. And they had, they were largely white female teachers, which isn't a bad thing. But they were presenting this text, and the text was about the theme of emancipation. And they had a poem by Walt Whitman, which is great, and one by Emily Dickinson, which is great. And so as I was looking at that, I'm thinking, okay, I know a great poem about emancipation by Paul Laurence Dunbar, who is an African-American poet who can bring a different perspective to this. And so what I did is I was aware of that. Then I spoke to the person about it because I'm an instructional coach and I have the ability and some level of privilege to talk in that way. And it got put into the curriculum 2 weeks later with the lesson that I did. So that kind of using whatever power you have to address what might be even subtle imbalances and biases in the work is one way that we can start to piece by piece put our fingerprint on the systems that serve our students. And so I just kind of want to stop there, and I want to open up to anyone else who'd like to share some practices either in the chat box or on our webinar that they do.
And two that I can also raise, Josh, is that so maybe they aren't hiring teachers of color, and so maybe principals aren't elevating really talented teachers who happen to be of color. What I decided to do as a department chair is have those teachers in my department. I have 4. All of a sudden, they're all on level. They've taught on level for years, and this is my 2nd year at the school. So I made a conscious decision to put them in honors classes and AP classes so that at least there be some broader representation. So I'm not waiting for other folks. I went ahead and sort of did that on my own. And of course, the students are the better for it. And their pedagogical practice is the better for it, and the department is better for it. The second thing is that when I have my ELL students and first-generation students come to me because they're so frustrated with the level of work that all of a sudden I'm in class for an expectation. And they're so used to bringing drop forms to teachers. And what I do is draw a frowny. and that I'm not going to sign it. And I'm going to have a conversation with them about why is it that when you look in a mirror, you don't see your true self? Why is it that we can't together sort of lift this stereotype because you're one of the best writers in my class? And I wonder myself, where has she learned or he learned that they cannot have the aptitude that is required for this class? So I loved the teacher before, and I'm sorry, forgive me, I don't remember who it was who was talking about the humanity and love that must exist in the classroom, because what we do is a fundamentally human endeavor. And so to reach students of all races and ethnicities and to try to bridge that gap, right? The bridge has to meet both sides of the stream. So it is really, and I know it might sound like, ooh, Jody, what are you doing? But that humanity, that heart and teacher that is going to provide dignity to those students that come in and really care about their learning and helping them see a future so that they can talk about one, is really part of, I think, strategies that have to be in place. I'm loving what I'm seeing here in the chat.
This is Maddie, and I just wanted to add, it struck me, Josh, can people hear me?
Yep.
Great, sorry. It struck me, Josh, when you were talking about what you did, reminded me of a lot of what our friend Leanne Stevens does in Minnesota, where she's, many of us think of literacy coaches or math coaches, science coach. She's actually an equity coach. Mm-hmm. She goes around and helps teachers understand how they can make their lessons more equitable. So really, that's kind of the role that you chose to take on when you did that. You were dual, once again, hybrid role, meeting the needs that way. I also find it interesting that I'm sorry, I joined late. The gentleman who was speaking before you and was talking about test scores and what our intelligence is. I have a real problem with us defining kids so narrowly. I'm sure we all do. But I also understand that part of the reason, I started teaching in 1990, so I taught, I taught before NCLB, all through NCLB. There's a lot I didn't like about it, but I will say that until NCLB came along, nobody really cared how my poor kids were doing. Nobody cared how my black and brown kids were doing. So the fact that we disaggregated the data was a good thing. The fact that we were looking at the data was a good thing. What the problem came is when we let the data become the definition of what it meant to be successful. The data should have been a touch point. The data should have been, in many cases, and was a wake-up call, but we shouldn't have let that data define who our students are, and for sure, it shouldn't define who they can be at some point.
That's a powerful point, Maddie. Thank you for joining us. That's a really powerful point. So because of these mandates about everybody being 100% by a certain amount of time, and if they're quote unquote failing, that becomes their label, then their destiny, not a starting place for support. And I find that that is where definitely we lost our way. So I love that. Any more comments and solutions about what you do? And we're going to advance the slide to the next kind of slide to see a couple things that also we can do. Any other ideas? The floor is open, and also the chat box is open and it's humming.
I'd love to hear from Betsy Johnson, if you don't mind, with your wanting to eradicate the school to prison pipeline and how we might strategize to begin that process.
While we're waiting for Betsy, if anybody else wants to chime in, feel free.
Josh, this is Eleanor. I'm concerned about the way that we talk about children of color in professional development and in education courses. When I was in graduate school, the only time we talked about children of color, it was with deficits in mind. We never talked about the full range of Black and brown children. When we talked about Asian children, we only talked about the top of the performance scale. And so I think that even when you have well-intentioned teachers, part of their training leads them to look at Black and brown students from a deficit point of view. And when they look at Asian students, they are forgetting the fact that they run the full gamut as well. So I think we need to encourage people to watch their language in professional development classes. If all you ever talk about is the deficiencies of Black and brown students, that's what teachers are going to have in the forefront of their thinking.
That's such a profound point. Such a profound point. I wholeheartedly agree. And part of some of the presentations that I bring, I like to bring a range of experiences in. Unfortunately, much of our conversation is around what African American students aren't doing well in, not the ones that are doing fantastically as well. Because I find that the issue in many schools that I'm in, and also doing school reform for a while now, is that the African American children, Latino children, ELL, the ones that are in the middle are the ones that most often get no attention at all. And
Right.
they're ready, willing, and able to step up to the plate.
Right. And they will slip into the lower quadrants for lack of attention.
Happens all the time. So I hear a solution, Eleanor, in what you're saying, which is let's broaden the discussion. Let's not forget about the students that are in the gap, so to speak, but let's also think about the students that are being successful, because the students that are being successful and the students that are in the gap are usually in the same school and in the same hallway. So maybe we can learn something from those that have navigated the institutional racism that is present and the issues of power and privilege that is present, and that we can learn something from that.
And this is Maddie, and I don't want us to forget the importance of the parent in that equation.
Mm-hmm.
So many of our parents have felt, the institutional racism has significantly impacted them in ways that we don't even know. And so if we're going to really combat that, we have to also include the parents in that and reach out to them in new and different ways. I always say they have these, dads and donuts and moms and muffins. And one night before I was supposed to do a parent presentation, I invited moms over for margaritas. And let me tell you, you want to find out about what parents have been through. Invite a few moms over on Friday night for margaritas. And it was the best professional development I ever had. I never looked at parents the same again. I always felt the parents, every parent, and I said every parent wants what's best for their kids. They just don't know what that is or how to get it. And if you're, just like we have high expectations for our students, if we hold the same frame for parents that they want what's best, we just have to help them and advocate for the parents at the same time. We'll have a greater impact as teachers if we teach parents how to be advocates, so that when they leave our classroom, they have a lifelong advocate for them.
Hello, can you hear me? This is Betsy Johnson.
Hey, Betsy. Good. Thank you.
Hi. Well, I'm just listening and really enjoying the engagement of this conversation. I would like you all to, when you get time, to join the my NEA360.org, which of course is eradicating the school to prison pipeline. And I provide a lot of information about equity, restorative practices, institutionalized racism, and the whole gamut as it relates to our Black and brown children. But one of the main reasons that I chimed in tonight when I got the invitation was because of the equity in my classroom, which I teach high-level coding. And 4 girls were placed into my class, ESOL 1 level, if you will, and very bright girls. And they were all 2 French, 1 Thai, and 1 Spanish. And no curriculum or nothing was provided for them, or strategies in terms of how to teach these young girls. Now, I am a senior teacher with the ELL certification. However, I certainly can teach these girls, and I certainly can have them acculturate and become very successful. But the issue that I'm dealing with is my personal feeling is you don't put 4 ESOL 1 level students in a class with no strategies. I believe that they should be separated out into other classes. Coding, for example, is a very difficult course to teach to an ESOL level 1 student, although they can do it. But when you put 4 of them, because that teacher is a seasoned teacher, it's a very unfair practice, I think, for the girls. And I don't want to be seen as the angry Black woman, if you will. Anybody have suggestions?
I think here's what I think about that, and I'm going to go into our solutions because our time is already winding up, which I knew would happen with a conversation like this. You know, the stereotype of the angry Black woman versus the angry Black man, which I deal with. I think the stereotype that we need to, or the idea that we want to think about is: are we telling truth to power? Are we saying what needs to be done, and are we speaking up for those that are voiceless and for students who may not have power in that setting? If it's not, for Betsy's point, if it's not a good solution for 4 level 1 ESOLs you just place in a class like that, then speaking truth to power, regardless of what the consequences are, is for the student. And I think that's really important. And I want to hit these 3 really quickly and get out of the way to continue the conversation as we get into the end. If you're thinking about what are some things that I can do at my level to really help this out, first stage is engage the discomfort. So if you are seeing inequity happen, whether it be, as Keisha Davis Caldwell talked about, or Major talked about, it is incumbent upon us to speak up and to say, hey, listen, I'm not sure if you recognize this, but this is not providing access to these students, or this is making it seem that there's one way to be perceived as smart, right? All of these different ideas, we have to be able to speak up and hold these discussions. The discomfort is where learning takes place, so we need to be able to engage the discomfort. I gave a solution, we gave a solution of principles and practice on the right side. Oftentimes when I have had data to start the conversation, to say how can we get this done, that has opened it up further to look at practice. Because at the end of the day, as I said about an hour ago, we have 2 sides to this issue. We have the issue of pedagogically and content knowledge. That's one side of this rail, and Jody could add maybe another rail to it. But the other side of it is us understanding and being aware of the issues that are in place. If we never handle both at the same time, we'll either become people who are not pedagogically and content strong to deal with the issue, or those who are content strong but not aware. So we have to be able to engage both sides of the continuum through professional development. So also, the second piece that I want to bring up is share the power. Build an opportunity to decrease the power distance between teachers, administrators, and students, whether that be faculty and student games, whether that be students co-creating what's happening in the school. It's so interesting to me how often we as teachers and administrators use our power to really shut out the students that are inhabiting the same space as us for 10 months. We need to include them in the process of their classes, the electives. I've seen different interviews where students have come in with other teachers to interview a prospective teacher. That is how you break down the barriers of power and privilege and make it a shared resource. And what I have experienced is that when you share power, there's more power for everyone, okay? And then the last thing I want to talk about, and you've heard this before, check your privilege, use your privilege, which is to say, wherever you have power and access that others don't share, make sure you are using that to advocate for those who can't speak for themselves, right? There are so many issues that I see in school where I'm handling it at a high level because I know there are students who can't speak. So sometimes I'll do a professional development on engagement because I know that the kids can't speak to the teacher because they may come off in the wrong way. So I have to really speak from my level and say, we've got to increase the engagement. So whatever sphere of influence you have, whatever privilege you have, use it to advocate for others. Make sure that you are sharing the power, and make sure you're engaging the discomfort. Those are 3 different ways in which we can start to dismantle these power structures that are keeping people apart. At this point, I do want to hand it off to Jody, as we are almost out of time, and also kind of wrap up our session for today.
Jody, you're still muted.
Is it Laurie secretly muted me? Knew I'd come in. Josh, thank you for that. And what you're saying, sort of not saying, but we're saying is we've got to elevate and empower student voice. We just have to. And I know that in my county, because we recently had a horrific video that was shared by a student, we came together as a community, all stakeholders. Maddie's talking about the parents, we had elders, we had teachers, staff, and we made it a point that we were absolutely going to begin, at least at the high school level, to have student voice circles and to make sure that we've got this safe space to have them talk about these issues that we know that they're experiencing. And I think that bringing in those teachers, Josh, that PD element too, is really going to help them, students, them own their school and what they experience to help that learning process.
I think, and anyone can kind of chime in with any final points that you may have that you think is really important for the team to consider. The idea of power and privilege is this idea that we know as teachers, even if we belong to a certain class or a certain race or what have you, as teachers and as teacher leaders, when we step into the schoolhouse, we have the power to either hurt or to help. We have the power to either restrict or to open. We have the power to either empower or discourage. And so we also have the power to challenge and speak truth to power in a way that will bring about results for students who cannot advocate for themselves in a way that will be heard. So if you think about the 2 ears that we have, one ear has got to be to what the structure is saying, what the power structure is demanding. The other ear has to be to those that are voiceless and those that cannot advocate for themselves. So I think that's a really key idea to think about when it comes to power and privilege. And remember those 2 sides of the coin. You have pedagogy and content on the one side, but then you have to have the awareness of power and privilege and how it plays out in the school to make a change. And with that, I will give it to Lori or anyone else who's on the call who would like to give a lasting kind of thought.
I just have a thought. This is Keisha again. I just wanted to really thank you guys for the what now slide. That was really powerful. I think anytime we talk about power, privilege, access, equity, and just institutional racism, it is so big and massive, and people want to do something, but they don't know how to get started. So these 3 levels, it's just really helpful, very practical, and very real. So thanks for that.
You bet. We're here for that. I appreciate Enstoy, Laurie, helping to make this happen, and we hope that this is actually one of many throughout the academic year that we can all again feel very safe to be able to come together as a community of learners and a community of advocates in behalf of our students.
Yeah. Jody, will you advance it to that last slide? Yes, so I will, first of all, Jody and Josh, you've totally brought it. And so we really appreciate it, but also the people listening and the chat and making the contributions with your voices. It just made it so much more powerful. I really, really appreciate it. You're going to get a survey in about 10 minutes. The one reason I want to tell you about that is that the last question says, if we have another conversation about social justice and equity in the classroom, what would you like to talk about? So there is a place, we are thinking of having many conversations about this. And so if you've got some things that you're interested in, we can queue up for that kind of thing. I will send everybody the PowerPoint. I will also send everybody a link to the recorded webinar and any other materials. If Josh or Jody send me anything that they want me to forward on to you, I will. I just want to give you one last reminder that you can save your chat if you would like. And the way you do that is that in the chat window at the very bottom on the right, there's a little thing that says more. And you can click on that more arrow and scroll it down to save chat, and it will save the chat for you to your hard drive. So thank you so much. Thank you for bringing it. You may want to jot down Josh and Jody's emails. We've also got Twitter handles, and let's just keep the conversation going. But thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Josh and Jody, I would like to invite you to a webinar at the National Education on NEA on this conversation. If you can, I'll email you if you can give me some